Hello, I'm Edward Palmieri, and I lead global sustainability at Facebook. I'm so happy to be at Climate Week again this year, as this has always been a key platform for us all to come together to accelerate climate action. In just a few minutes, I have the honor of moderating a panel on communicating climate change with some of the most inspiring and impactful storytellers. They include the amazing filmmaker Jeff Orlowski, Sarah Shanley Hope, the VP of Partnerships and Brand at the Solutions Project, and Brady Pinheiro-Walkinshaw, the CEO of Grist. So stay tuned for that upcoming conversation. But before that, I'm going to take just a quick minute to share what we've been up to at Facebook. This past year has not been easy for any of us as we continue to grapple with the effects of the pandemic. Facebook has been hard at work supporting pandemic recovery by partnering with governments to tackle COVID misinformation and vaccine hesitancy while helping small businesses navigate the fallout of the pandemic. Despite shifting to a remote and virtual work environment, the Facebook Global Sustainability team has continued to make progress in our fight against climate change, and I'm excited to share a little bit about that work. At Facebook, our efforts to minimize the impact of our operations, reduce our emissions, as well as our energy and water consumption, have spanned more than 10 years. We do this by maximizing efficiencies in our operations and finding new ways to run our data centers and our workplaces more sustainably. In the past year, we've made strides towards our environmental commitments. In 2020, we reached net zero emissions across our global operations, and that was through a 94% reduction in our emissions footprint. We addressed the remaining balance of our carbon footprint with carbon removal projects. Our 94% reduction in our carbon footprint is connected largely to our goal to have Facebook powered by 100% renewable energy for our operations. We reached that goal in 2020 and will continue that every year from here on out. We also committed to achieving net zero emissions across our entire value chain by 2030, aligning to the Science-Based Target Initiative and setting targets that will help limit global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. As we all know, it's really important that the global community comes together to reduce the carbon footprint of the planet and avoid exceeding that 1.5 degrees Celsius. Additionally, earlier this month, we announced a new commitment to become water positive by 2030. This means we will restore more water than we consume globally. In addition to using water efficiently in our data centers and facilities, a key part of our water stewardship strategy is supporting high-quality projects that restore local watersheds near our data center communities. Many of these projects play a critical role in preserving local habitats and advancing biodiversity. In 2020 alone, we restored 595 million gallons of water. Some examples of our recent water restoration projects that I'm excited to tell you about are our work with the Navajo Nation Water Supply Project. That project will provide a source of drinking water for Navajo families in Arizona currently without access to water in their homes. We're also working with the Colorado River Indian Tribes System Conservation Project to help conserve and stabilize declining water levels in Lake Mead, which will be such important work. We believe sustainability is about more than operating responsibly. And so as we address our own footprint, we want to leverage opportunities to support the communities that we are part of and have a positive impact around the world. Adapting to the impacts of climate change will require more and more innovative solutions. Beyond our operations, we leverage the capabilities of our platform to develop products that catalyze climate action. Across our supply chain, we work with suppliers to protect workers and the environment, putting systems in place to ensure they conform with applicable international human rights standards, labor and employment laws, and environmental rules and regulations. And in 2020, we launched the Climate Science Center to increase access to science-based and authoritative climate information from the world's leading science sources. This work was done in partnership with the IPCC and its global network of the best scientists from around the world. It's officially been a year since we launched the Climate Science Center, and the site has gained 3 million followers to date and averages 300,000 visitors every single day. Just this month, we announced a climate misinformation grant program as well. It's going to be administered by the International Fact-Checking Network. The goal of this new initiative is to build capacity in the skill set among fact checkers to rate and evaluate climate change content. Through this grant program, we're going to invest in proposals that bring fact checkers together with academics and scientists to create projects that focus on combating climate misinformation. So as we all know, climate change is too great of a challenge for any one company or economy to solve alone. This is why we must build partnerships and collaborate with globally renowned organizations to further catalyze climate action and scale impact. Facebook works with the Climate Group to drive awareness and conversations around the impacts of climate change during the UN General Assembly and Climate Week NYC events. Last year, we partnered with the Climate Group to reach a wider audience through Facebook Watch Live and distribute more climate-related content on Facebook via our dedicated Facebook and Unga microsite channel. We will also talk a bit more in the upcoming panel about how climate change impacts all of us, but some more than others. Increasingly, we're seeing how this phenomenon can have a disproportionate impact on global communities. So our vision at Facebook is that a just and equitable transition to a zero carbon economy is one where no one is left behind. As a global company, we embrace the responsibility of not only reducing our environmental impact, but also advancing climate solutions that are inclusive. As I reflect on the past 10 years at Facebook, I realize that what makes Facebook unique and the reason why I've stayed on for as long as I have to do this work is our ability to move fast and make an impact. I see the same mindset going from zero to impact quickly among my colleagues as we lead the sustainability program at the company and we reach milestone after milestone. So thank you again. I look forward to sharing more about our efforts in the future. Meanwhile, I invite you to visit sustainability.fb.com and stay tuned for the next conversation on communicating climate change. Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Edward Palmieri, and I lead global sustainability at Facebook. I'm so happy to be at Climate Week. We have the honor of moderating this panel on communicating climate change. And we have some of the most inspiring and impactful storytellers with us today. I'd like to welcome our three panelists. The amazing filmmaker, Jeff Olowski. You may be familiar with his films such as Chasing Coral and Chasing Ice. Welcome, Jeff. We also have Sarah Shanley Hope, the VP of Partnerships and Brand at the Solutions Project. Welcome, Sarah. The Solutions Project is an important partner for Facebook. Just last week, we co-hosted a workshop focusing on capacity building of environmental organizations. Really great to have you, Sarah. And finally, we have Brady Pinheiro-Walkinshaw, CEO of Grist. Grist is a leading online magazine focused on climate justice and solutions. Of course, I get all of my climate news from Grist. Welcome, Brady. What an amazing panel. Now, let's get right to it because I know we only have a little bit of time together today. I'm going to ask a question for each of you to answer briefly, and I'm hoping you'll include in part of that introducing yourself and your work. You each have a different approach to communicating on climate and the medium to which you communicate with unique perspectives based on your work. The theme this year for Climate Week is getting it done. So what does this mean to you at your organization? And maybe let's start with you, Sarah.
Thank you, Edward. So good to be here today. So I'm Sarah Shanley Hope. I'm the VP of Brand and Partnerships at the Solutions Project, which means that I'm on the team that supports dozens of frontline organizations all across the United States with their narrative strategies and communications capacity. So the Solutions Project is a U.S. national organization that funds and amplifies the climate justice solutions created by women and other people of color at the front lines of the climate crisis. They're also often at the forefront of the most effective and innovative climate solutions. And on a dime and without the spotlight, they're constantly getting it done because women of color are the backbones of their communities. And we're honored at the Solutions Project to do our part to move money and media behind their leadership and their stories of success.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Brady, how about you?
Great. It's great to be on. I'm Brady Pinheiro-Walkinshaw. I head up Grist, which is a leading national media organization dedicated to journalism, to telling stories, to elevating leaders, to thinking about how we get to a better and more just future on the other side of carbon. Our mission as an organization, which we think about a lot, is to make the story of a better future so irresistible that you want it right now. And that notion, I think, really comes home to this kind of idea of getting it done and the sense of urgency for the moment. And that I think something we'll probably explore more in this panel, but this idea of how do we start to imagine what the future will be? What can it be? What does it need to be as we transition to an economy, to society, to a human species on this planet that thinks differently about its relationship to natural resources and thinks about what the world looks like after carbon. So I think that storytelling, that journalism for us means really deep investigative reporting that we do. It means really beautiful long form, visually immersive projects. It means day-to-day reporting on everything from culture to politics to innovative technology solutions that are impacting the future of the planet. And some other creative ways, engaging mediums like fiction, engaging film to help craft what that better future can be. So that's what we do at Grist. We're a team of about 60 people. We're based in Seattle, but we're around the country.
Awesome. Thank you, Brady. Jeff, how about you next?
Yeah, thanks, Edward. And it's so great to be here with all of you. Our team at Exposure Labs, we are dedicated to telling stories that can shape a better future. And the work that we've been doing has both been on the filmmaking side, but then there's this other often overlooked or sort of difficult to act on part of the equation, which is what do you then do with those films? Films can be released, they can be distributed, and they sort of find their natural audience. And the same environmental choir that has seen all of the films that have come out on climate for years and years, those audiences are going to very naturally come and watch the latest film that they're interested in. But some of the work that we're really focused on is how do you then take those films and get it out to wider networks and wider groups? What does that long tail look like? What does that impact opportunity look like? So at Exposure Labs, we have a whole team of people dedicated to leveraging those stories for change, to do the harder work of getting the films out into the world. Right now, we have a big partnership with SEN, the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, to take a whole library of climate films, not just the films that we've made about climate change, like Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, but a whole slate of environmental films, working with their network and their partnerships to take those films and to do more work out in the world so that audiences can come and engage and be exposed to these issues and themes that they might not otherwise see. So that's just a slice of what we've been doing at Exposure Labs.
That's really great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you all. I think we can safely say you're all focused on getting it done in consistent with the theme this year for Climate Week. I'm hoping now we could go a little bit deeper. You're all experts in storytelling and communicating on the complex topic of climate. And so I'm wondering, what types of stories do you think need to be told? A decade ago, perhaps there were different stories that were being told or needed to be told. And what do you think needs to be told now, and where are we as a movement? Jeff, I'm wondering if we could start with you.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about your work in communicating climate through film. It's such a powerful way to communicate. And so could you talk a little bit more about how we can leverage film as a storytelling medium to influence public opinion, encourage people to change behaviors and attitudes, and also encourage businesses to take broader action?
Yeah. Well, I love the focus of this conversation, and I think to a large degree what Brady was sharing earlier around the mission and vision for Grist and the types of stories that you're identifying there. That's what we've seen in the film world as well. Our films Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral were about visual evidence of climate change, and they came out in 2012 and 2017, and at the time we made those films in large part because we had so much climate denialism, that we had such resistance, and it was such a challenge just to get evidence out there, just to say, hey, look, no, we know this is really happening. And the films that we made at the time were very much with that goal. It was like time lapses of our planet changing as a direct symbol of climate change, as a direct representation of climate change. But I don't really think we need those types of stories anymore. There's still denialism out there, but it's so hard to hold that position nowadays. What we need instead, as Brady was speaking to, is we need a better path forward. we need to see what that path forward looks like. So much of our futuristic filmmaking and so much of the climate filmmaking shows a very dystopian future. Like most narrative films, most Hollywood films are showing a very, very dystopian, everything's messed up, this is post-apocalyptic representation, and then the story takes place in that setting. And I think that's bad for our psyche, just to be inundated with all the time around, like, look at how bad it's going to be in the future. That's not good for our youth. That's not good for future generations. That's not good for us to be that depressed around it. And yes, the reality of the science is harsh, but there are also opportunities and pathways for us to change that story. And I think that's one of the things that we really need right now. We need to see a much more optimistic future laid out for us. We need to shine a light on what that path could look like so that we can inspire both our leaders and everyday people to take those actions that we need to build the better future that we want for everyone.
Mm. Thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful. Of course, I want to remind everyone, although it was a story from the past, and I think you're exactly right in the stories we need to tell in the future. If audience members, if you haven't yet seen Chasing Coral or Chasing Ice, definitely check those out. And I love your message, Jeff, about pivoting to this next generation of conversation, particularly in the youth context. And I think we'll get a little bit more into that in the future questions. Brady, I was hoping we can pivot to you next. At Grist, you approach this topic from a wide lens: politics, equity, culture, energy, and how they all intersect with climate. And I think talking about them in that intersecting way is so important. And there's so much climate content to consume. How do we stay authentic with these stories, and not just share the doom and gloom that Jeff was just mentioning? How do we remain optimistic and connect people with the right information and content?
Yeah, I really agree with everything Jeff said. And I think that idea of how do we kind of move beyond this doom and gloom narrative, not to say that we're going to be Pollyannish about what a future will look like as we conquer and move through climate change. But I think that there are ways to kind of tell those stories and report those stories in different ways that also help people to imagine what the future can be, and also showcase how we're getting there. So for me, there's a couple specific examples. One is every year at Grist, we produce this list called the Grist 50, which we call them fixers, which are 50 people around the country, emerging leaders, usually at the forefront of environment justice and sustainability. They're remarkable people. We get thousands of nominations. And we think about how we can really amplify and lift up these stories of people who we call fixers. Many of them are involved with the Climate Week activities, but who are on the front lines of making this world better. So that's one thing we do. I also think a lot about kind of the day-to-day coverage, and I think it's really important to just ratchet up the surround sound and to do it in a way that is amplifying a narrative that is along the lines of what Jeff was describing. It's stories that aren't just blindly optimistic, but are stories that are, whether it's showcasing a technology or a social movement or a piece of policy progress, or ways that new narratives are coming up in Hollywood films that might not be a kind of doom and gloom narrative. It might be about what does the world look like when you electrify your vehicle grid, for example, or when you move to a zero carbon kind of energy infrastructure and kind of start to make that second nature. And I think how we do that through storytelling is really important. So that's a bit about how we've been thinking about it. And moving beyond a lot of the kind of doom and, just to use your word, Edward, the kind of doom and gloom narrative that you might see in mainstream media often. It's easy to report kind of tragedies of hurricanes or increased threats from natural disasters, which are all real, and will only amplify. But there are other sides to those as well. And I think solving them will not be covering them more. I think solving them will actually be thinking about how we address solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brady, for that. Super interesting. I totally agree. And I think, even with the recent IPCC report, which is now much more definitive in drawing the connection between climate change and these more frequent and more severe weather patterns that people are experiencing all over the world. I think to Jeff's point earlier, like some of this stuff is now at an undeniable place, and now we can start talking about solutions and where do we go from here. So, talking about solutions, Sarah, I'd love to pivot to you next with your work with the Solutions Project. as we talked about earlier, you really focus on lifting the voices of your partner organizations who serve the most vulnerable communities. So I was wondering for you, why is it important to always consider those frontline voices? Could you tell us a little bit more about the opportunity for communities to tell their own stories through mediums and channels, and address issues like climate justice solutions and frontline communications?
Yes. So the work that we do is very much aligned with what Brady and Jeff shared is what's needed in more kind of main stage communications, whether that's documentary films or feature films. Uh, we've even got, musicians now putting out incredible albums all around climate change. And for the Solutions Project, we start with our grassroots grant making program because that's the source of climate justice solutions, is supporting those 100 plus organizations alone in our network, all across the country, and in some of the most unlikely of places to find that hope and that innovation and that story of communities coming together to not only get it done, but to create the future that their community wants and that we all want. And so starting there, and really building those relationships and that trust with frontline communities, you're able to just see the texture and the connectedness of climate justice solutions as a leading force. When climate justice leads, we all win, is what we frequently say. And it's because the solutions are practical. These are the communities that are literally, have been experiencing climate crisis now for years. They've been experiencing environmental degradation for decades. And so they've already been connecting the dots between housing and health and the economy and workforce. And how do you even look at whole cities or rural communities through a lens of interconnected climate justice solutions that really improve people's lives? And so all of those approaches that we learn about and support and strengthen through our grant making program, we then move into partnership on storytelling. And, all of their solutions are, worthy of scale. But for the storytelling aspect, they're human-centered stories, first and foremost. So they're the most resonant stories for climate action. You can actually understand how climate solutions connect to your day-to-day life if you're a mom like me in Oakland, California, and you're asking questions about how our schools are going to really prepare our young people for a climate changed future. Intergenerational programming all across the country in these frontline communities have already been solving those problems because they've been facing them. And frequently because of all of the isms, racism, sexism, historic disinvestment in these communities, they're solving these problems without a lot of media attention, without the philanthropic funding to support a communications team that can bring their stories to those main stage. And so that's what is the opportunity for all of us to do, is to resource and support with respect these climate justice stories that are ready and so full of hope.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, Sarah. And I think the more climate justice solutions and conversations are weaved into the overall conversation about climate, the better off we will be in crafting those solutions. I could not agree more with you there. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I've really loved and appreciated our time together. I'm really humbled by all the work you all do and the expertise and strategies you bring. I can't believe we're down to our final question, but I'm just going to jump right into it because here we are. So before we head on to the other Climate Week sessions that are coming, I'd love to hear from you all, building more on this note of hope and optimism. I really like that theme with this panel, and I want to keep going just a little bit more on it. So I'm wondering if you could answer, what is the most inspiring thing you have learned as part of the climate action process? Sarah, could we start with you?
I always go back to my hometown of Buffalo, New York, where I grew up, and it's not a place that is top of mind for most people as like a thriving, innovative city. It's actually a post-industrial city that has experienced decades of economic loss, and yet in Buffalo, New York, there are incredible climate justice organizations and solutions. One of our grantees, Push Buffalo, who will be speaking in another Climate Week event, um, you can literally go and meet someone working in every green job imaginable. They've got geothermal heating and offshore wind in Buffalo, New York, energy efficiency, solar panels, and whole block by block uh, homes and families and communities that you can really see. And again, these are from this place of Phoenix rising from the ashes, refugees from Burma who resettled in Buffalo and are now finding life through community, brownfields that were dead to life after industrialization, coming back through community composting programs, and it's just incredible. In fact, A Quiet Place 2, making the Hollywood connection, is filmed in some of the land that our partners have helped restore in the city of Buffalo. So it gives me so much hope.
That's really great, Sarah. I think the story of like places that you don't necessarily associate with some of the innovation that you mentioned, like in Buffalo, and seeing the connection really is the best example of the hope element here, and also bringing everyone along. That the best solutions, kind of what we were all talking about in the last question, really the best solutions are the ones that reach out not just from the wealthiest, biggest cities, but out into all parts of the world where everyone can kind of participate and understand how they can play their own role in developing solutions and really embracing some of the future, sustainable future. So that's really great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. Brady, how about you? What's the most inspiring thing you've learned as part of the climate action process?
Well, maybe just building a bit on what Sarah was sharing, and maybe this is a little bit sobering, but also optimistic. I think we are in this, we are the whole focus of Climate Week this year, and a lot of the global negotiations, policies that are happening at the federal level in the U.S. and locally. We are in this, critical window to act. And what's encouraging to me right now is I do feel that for the first time, and maybe it's happened in places over the last several years, but the solutions that are being advanced, the ideas that people are talking about, the technologies that are being developed, the social movements that are sprout, I think are starting to match the scale of the problem that we have when we look at data from like the IPCC report around what it'll actually take to kind of achieve the levels of decarbonization that we need to avert the worst impacts of the climate crisis over the next 10 to 20, 30 years. So I think that's what's optimistic to me. I think that's why I make storytelling all the more important, because I think when you actually play out what these solutions look like in society, it actually is a reimagining. It's a rethinking. It changes what our daily lives will be. I think it can be for the better. So what's inspiring to me right now is that I think we're thinking at the right scale.
I love that. I mean, one of the things, Brady, that we've thought about as we're designing our own program is that like we want to enable solutions that will work for us to help decarbonize our own footprint, particularly in our value chain, but also extend that capability to help bring other folks along, maybe people that are willing to participate but aren't able to develop the same way we are, or things like that, and that scale and how to have impact beyond taking care of your own footprint, I think will be critical. And I love the intersection of like collaboration. We're all in this together. Let's develop solutions together to help scale it. That I think about when you're talking about what's inspiring to you. So that's really great, Brady. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Jeff, you kind of get the last word here. What's most inspiring to you as you've learned, and what have you
Yeah.
learned about in the climate action process?
Um, I I think just consistently, I've always been inspired by the youth, and the youth get it. and the youth recognize how urgent it is. It is their future on the line. I just had a conversation with a bunch of middle school students from Australia, and they watched Chasing Coral, and they were working on some projects together as a class of middle school students. They built a puppet show that they're showing to their friends and family even during COVID. They built a Minecraft game that is like scuba diving, and there's a shipwreck, and there are corals, and then there are bleached corals. They built a Lego project submission that they're submitting to Lego, so that you could like design and get a coral reef package as part of a Lego game with bleached corals in it. And like, those are just the ideas that these kids are acting on their own as a middle school class, because they recognize that they can be part of the solution. And I think that's the thing that excites me the most, is that more and more I'm seeing and just hearing about youth that want to take action. They're hungry for action. And that's going to be, as Sarah was talking about, all these different jobs in clean energy. Like, as we rebuild, as we transform our economy and the way we operate, it's those youth that are going to be eagerly seeking out all those jobs and to fill that capacity that we need. And that's what just gives me so much hope that the future does look bright.
Jeff, I could not agree more with that. And as a parent of a son who's obsessed with Minecraft, I'm going to have to check out the game and Legos, actually. So you gave me two great ideas there. Well, thank you for that. Thank you all for joining us today. Sarah, Brady, Jeff, I can't thank you enough for participating in the panel, and I really want to thank all of the Climate Week organizers for pulling together all of these wonderful events. Audience, I hope you'll stay with us as we share two short videos about Facebook's sustainability work and the Climate Science Center I mentioned earlier. And please enjoy all the rest of the programming today. Thank you again. Take care.
Hello, and welcome to Communicating Climate Change, a Climate Week NYC panel. My name is Ashley Laporte. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be moderating our conversation today. I join you from Duxbury, Vermont, on unceded Wabanaki land. I've spent over a decade in marketing, most recently was the director of integrated marketing at Seventh Generation. Starting next week, I'll begin a new chapter of my career, joining Rally, an issue advocacy firm, helping them build their corporate practice. As a marketer, an organizer, and an activist, I believe companies have a critical role in solving the biggest issues of our time, including the climate crisis, which is why I am thrilled to be moderating today's panel, which will discuss just that. The systemic issues standing in the way of addressing this urgent crisis must be tackled head on by all of us, but we know businesses play a particularly pivotal role. Today, I am joined by three business leaders who have come to talk about the role communications can play in the fight against the climate crisis. Alan Sullivan, co-CEO at JC&Co. Christina Kloberdance, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at MasterCard. And Mark Pritchard, Chief Brand Officer at Procter & Gamble, here today on behalf of P&G Fabric Care. So welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I'm hoping that attendees today have taken the time to read your bios or that they'll take time after our session. So instead of the typical tell us about yourself, I wanted to ask each of you an intro question. Why do you believe it's important for brands and companies to play a role in fighting the climate crisis? What unique role do you think companies play when it comes to tackling this complex issue? And Christina, I'd love to hand it over to you first.
Sure. Thanks so much. Sustainability at MasterCard is at the core of our business strategy. We're all part of an interconnected system. And once we see that, our responsibility becomes very clear. We have to help those in need today and ensure the world emerges from this pandemic a stronger, more resilient place, because doing the right thing for society will lead to the right outcomes for business. The public, private, and civic sectors can and need to work together to address the challenges we face and achieve the objectives to which we aspire. No one can do it alone. There isn't enough philanthropy or official aid alone, although both are important. It takes the resources, the innovation, and the motivation of the private sector to help and to have impact at scale. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christina. Mark, I'll send it over to you next.
Yeah, I was once told that business will someday be the greatest force for good in the world. And I strongly believe that time has come. And in business, it's important to be both a force for good and a force for growth. Because if you're just a force for good, that's philanthropy. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we're all in business. We're not a nonprofit. If you're just a force for growth without good, then that can be somewhat mercenary. You need to do both. And business has the potential to do both. Be a force for good and be a force for growth, which then makes it sustainable. When it comes to the environment, our businesses have broad reach. For example, at P&G, we reach 5 billion people on the planet every day with our everyday household cleaning, health, and hygiene products. We ship to 100,000 retailers. We work with 60,000 suppliers. Our operations use energy, use water, generate waste. So what we need to do first and foremost is make sure that our operations are sustainable, which is why we just announced our net zero climate commitment, where we're really focusing on net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 across our operations. That's just one piece, though. The second piece that business can have a huge impact on is with consumers, because your operations are just part of the equation. When consumers, for example, use our cleaning, health, and hygiene products, again, they use energy, they use water, and waste is generated. That leads to greenhouse gas emissions. So what we need to do is then innovate to make sure that consumers can have the superior performance that they want from our products, while also being able to do good for the environment. Great example of that is Tide and Ariel, which are our laundry detergents. Consumers want clean laundry, but they also want to do right for the environment. What they don't always know is that 2/3 of the laundry life cycle greenhouse gas emissions comes from energy produced by heating the water in your washing machine. So we have innovated to create cold water washing capability. So you can wash your clothes in cold water. And what that does is takes 90% of the energy out, saves people $150 in their energy bill. But most importantly, what it does is it takes out greenhouse gas emissions. If everybody could switch, it would be 30 million metric tons that would come out of the environment by 2030. So that's one of the areas that business and brands really have an important role, is to focus on what they can do for the consumers. And if brands and companies can do it by themselves, first of all, individually within their operations or for consumers, and that if everybody collectively comes together, we all can have an enormous impact in business and truly be a force for good and a force for growth.
Thank you, Mark. Definitely speaking to the interconnected system Christina was talking about as well. Thank you. And Alan, over to you.
So this is the challenge of being the last person to respond to the question, finding something new to say after my two fellow panelists have so eloquently described the importance is tricky. However, what I will say and echo is that there is no monopoly on whose responsibility it is to tackle the climate crisis. Everyone is a stakeholder, and therefore everyone has a role to play in fighting climate change. And that absolutely has to include companies as well as cities and government. As market leaders in our respective fields, It is our responsibility to set the example for others to follow. But it goes beyond just words and platitudes, though. There has to be real commitment and defined goals, but crucially, action as well. For example, as the #1 out-of-home advertising company in the world, JCDecaux is the first in our field to sign up to RE100, which we all know is a coalition of companies committed to achieving 100% renewable energy. It is vital, though, that there is a coordinated approach to dealing with the climate crisis. It can't just be achieved through disparate strategies, and it has to be a top-to-toe solution. And what I mean by that is sustainability has to include all elements of the business. In media and advertising, for example, I was delighted to see Mark Reed of WPP state that as part of Group M's commitment to net zero, so WPP's investment company, they are going to work with media partners to develop industry-wide standards for measuring and eliminating carbon emitted from the ads that are placed. So I would love to see that go further. I'd love to see brands themselves insisting on only using media channels that have made a commitment to delivering material sustainability goals. But as has been said already, it is not just the role of private enterprise to do this. We cannot power the enormous changes necessary by ourselves. Global, national and local policy must drive sustainability. Bearing in mind that cities cover about 3% of the land on Earth, but account for about 72% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, they are, and they're continuing to grow, they are an absolutely vital cog in tackling climate crisis. So I would love to see cities embedding sustainability criteria in their procurements. Procurement is a fantastic tool for prioritizing climate change impact and creating sustainable streetscapes.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I can tell this is going to be an amazing conversation from all the different angles that we've started to tackle it. And so as we continue the conversation, Christina, I wanted to ask this next question to you. Obviously, you're currently the Chief Sustainability Officer at MasterCard, but you started your career as a marketer. And I'm also a marketer, and I'm also focused on issue advocacy work. So I love that you've been in both spaces. And I'm wondering, given your experience, why is it important for companies and brands to communicate about sustainability? What unique role do communications play when it comes to this work?
Thank you, Ashley. I love the question. And thinking back, years ago, people didn't want marketing or branding to get too close to the work that was happening in the sustainability field, because for fear that it would be seen as green. But quickly we have surpassed that hurdle. And now we're at the point where you have to communicate what you're doing. You have to tell the story of what you're doing. And there's so many different stakeholders and audiences, and how you tell that needs to be different. But I'll first start off by the idea that MasterCard is a payments and a technology company. And so inherently, our environmental footprint is pretty green and pretty clean. However, we have to manage our own operations as well as our supply chain. And so we've taken this seriously and set our science-based targets for 1.5 in line with the Paris Agreement. We joined RE100. We earlier this year had set our target for net zero and really committed to it. But the interesting thing is, even if we do all of that, because of the nature of our business, we are actually able to make a greater impact when we go beyond that. And consumers were mentioned earlier by one of my fellow panelists. And this unique positioning that MasterCard has is we actually have a reach of nearly 3 billion cardholders. And that, if we can help move them along in this process of awareness to actually inspire them, to equip them and enable them to take action, we need consumers and individuals to help us address climate action. It's too urgent to not include them in the process. And so with that, if you think about MasterCard as a brand and communicating then to consumers, we've had a long history with our priceless brand. And so it was a logical extension for us once we had made the commitments and actually driven our own operations, to extend that to a priceless planet. We know people care. And so we created the Priceless Planet Coalition last year and committed to plant 100 million trees around the globe in 5 years. But again, it's bigger than any one of us. So we now have over 65 partners that are part of the Priceless Planet Coalition with us. And we're actually encouraging consumers to shift their consumption, their choices, their behavior to more sustainable. And we know that if society continues on the path that we're on, we're going to deplete the natural resources of the planet. So that question, Ashley, that you asked of communicating, there are many different ways to communicate. And I think that what's utterly important is this idea of trust, and trust of the private sector with all of our stakeholders. And the way that we're going to hopefully engender that trust is when what we're doing is authentic and strategic. And so then it's not just a philanthropic effort. It's not a bolted on, but it really becomes strategic with our business model. And with that, we're really looking to help drive this momentum for climate action, because we don't have time to not do that. And so, Ashley, I'll turn it back to you, and we can go into some of the rest of it further.
Thank you, Christina. That's so helpful. And I'm just picking up on both what you said and Mark said about reach, and how important it is for big companies to be able to reach billions of card members and billions of, for example, fabric care users for P&G. And when we think about reach, Mark, I'm wondering, I know Procter & Gamble has made an effort in recent years to communicate its commitment on sustainability, particularly when it comes to fabric care brands like Tide. And can you talk a little bit about where and how you weave climate and sustainability content into your marketing and communication strategies as you go to reach billions of people with this message?
Yeah, definitely. The what we have is this opportunity because we reach so many consumers. We're off and on the world's largest advertiser. So we want to use our voice to be able to not only communicate the benefits of our products, but also environmentally sustainable ways in which they can do that, and ways that perhaps they could even change their behavior. But it requires innovation. And as I was talking about earlier around the innovation that we've made in order to be able to clean clothes in cold water, that requires a habit change because you have to literally turn the temperature down, and you have to make sure that you're washing in cold, and there's by changing that temperature reading, but also there's an element of disbelief. So what we have to do is help consumers understand that you can indeed get the cleaning you want and the performance that you want, as well as reduce the energy and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that come along with that. And there's a number of ways in which we're doing that. We've got a program called hashtag Turn to Cold campaign. There's one way that people are motivated by that, and one is that you save money on your energy bill. We've done another way where we brought in Ice-T and Stone Cold Mike Austin, and they've got a great campaign called Cold Callers, where they literally call people up like they call Vanilla Ice and convince them to turn to cold. And then we've done another program where we've used the reach of the National Football League. So we have a partnership with the NFL. We've come together with them, and we've convinced the NFL to turn to cold. Now that's a real torture test, and they didn't believe us at first. They're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, we can't. These are really dirty. These uniforms are." So we're not so sure about that. So we proved it to them, and then we got them to switch to cold. And then what we did is we joined forces with them in order to be able to now go to the next part of the reach, which is the 80 million NFL fans. Because if we can get 80 million NFL fans to turn to cold, that's going to take out 5.6 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the air, because now you're talking about 16 billion loads of laundry, and not just a million loads of laundry for the NFL or just your own load of laundry. So that's a way in which we are really creating new ways to be able to engage with consumers and help them understand that you can get the performance that you need and the sustainability you want. All you got to do is turn to cold. And that is marketing. And that is marketing being a force for good and a force for growth.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I mean, I think the influence of that is so interesting, right? And the ability to get scale not only from P&G consumers, but also with the NFL and everyone who watches football. And Alan, of course, JC is a B2B company. So we've been talking a lot about the importance of influencing end consumers. I'd love to turn to you on this question of how you use marketing and communications in your world to impact stakeholders. And particularly, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this initiative around getting brands to think about where and how they spend their advertising dollars with folks, who are putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to sustainability and solving the climate crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Much like MasterCard and Procter & Gamble, we too offer a truly global presence. We're present in 3,670 cities, spanning 80 countries across the world, reaching 840 million people. So I do feel that we are uniquely positioned as well to communicate the importance of sustainability to every stakeholder. And just incidentally, part of that has been, currently here on the streets of New York this week, we are using our inventory to promote Climate Week NYC. And, in similar events, we've done so for the past 3 years, whether it's the C40 in San Francisco, Women for Climate in Paris. And, we will continue to support the communication of environmental responsibility on our assets all over the world. And, I would, to your point, many B2C brands choose out of home to promote their commitments on sustainability. And our medium is a very efficient way of delivering that message to their potential customers. And, we are, all, after all, the original social media channel. But just going back to your question and something I touched on earlier, I do think there is a responsibility for advertisers to kind of put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. And as I said, I'd be delighted that if there was a commitment by brands to really only choose media channels that are meeting or driving towards material sustainability goals. I think that would be a fantastic environment for our industry. And to further reiterate on a point I made earlier, I think there is also a huge role to play in communicating the importance of sustainability with our city and transport authority partners as well. We are, JCDecaux, very proud of the important role sustainability plays in how we, our commitment to continuously minimize the impact that we have on the environment. And we take that opportunity to share these achievements and encourage all stakeholders to play their part in that, whether it be the cities, advertisers, and importantly, our supply chain as well.
Thank you, Alan. And that's actually the perfect transition to the next question that I had. And I'll turn it to Christina first, which is about sort of the responsibility that companies and brands have when celebrating sustainability goals, achieving them, setting them, the responsibility that we have to not greenwash. How do you go about making sure that we're educating consumers and celebrating impact when it happens, but doing so in a way that is not greenwashing or sort of taking away from what we know is a very urgent crisis ahead of us?
Absolutely, Ashley. And it's an issue that needs to always stay at the forefront, because this isn't about greenwashing, it's about impact. And we need companies, we need organizations to set big and bold targets and commitments, and that is good. But that's not enough. We all have to deliver on those commitments. And we need to do that in a way that there is rigor behind that. It's interesting, nature matters, but science matters. And so we've got to also be able to measure and monitor and ensure that we're not just committing, but that we're doing and driving that impact. And so in communicating the results of that, I think that's really important, because I go back to that idea of trust. And so when you ask the question also then about, educating, one of the things that we're doing at MasterCard is we have what's called the MasterCard Carbon Calculator. And we're actually working with a fintech out of the Nordics called Economy. And the idea, taking this concept that, you hear of net zero or climate neutrality, and you think that that's countries or companies, but what does an individual, what role can they play? And so if you think about it in your everyday life, when you use your card, not just being able to see then the transaction of the financial cost of something you purchased, but also the carbon cost of something that you purchased. So now all of a sudden, the way that we're communicating is not in telling, but it's actually in engaging. And so through that engaging process, you're beginning to educate and inform. And the more we inform consumers, the more they're actually going to hold all of us accountable. And so I think that, it's interesting when you look at all the different stakeholders, they all want proof that what we are actually saying we're doing. Investors are holding that, to large public companies in a significant way. And that's driving standards that is not then just about marketing and you talking about what you're doing, but even having that, information third party assured. And so that's going to keep us all honest. And so I think that, going forward, we want and we need the commitments. And we need to be able to communicate those, but we have to deliver on those results. And what's going to be interesting is that the urgency is only going to accelerate. So that is going to require us to act faster and reach that scale that we talked about earlier, faster. And it's bigger than any one of us. So we're going to have to all begin to partner in new ways. And that's where I think, it was mentioned earlier on the panel, is that when we can bring to bear the resources of our companies, then, we can have hopefully some exponential benefit. But I think the conversation always has to not just be on what do you say you're going to do, but we actually need to drive that home.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I in particular love how you talk about nature is important, but science is even more important, and the importance of measuring and monitoring. And so, the last question that I wanted, and I'll send it over to Mark first, and then Alan would love for you to answer as well, is let's talk more about walking the walk, more than just the talk here. And if you could please share, one thing beyond communicating about the climate crisis that each of your organizations is doing to actually have an impact. And bonus points if you can weave in how you're measuring the success of that to get to this point around holding ourselves accountable.
Well, it builds off the last discussion we just had. The thing that we do is action, and we focus on action, and it has to be congruent throughout every aspect of our company and our operations. We set ambitions, but the ambitions are science-based ambitions, and they're just that, they're ambitions. And then we have goals between when we set those ambitions and when we actually achieve those ambitions. We've been at it for 10 years. We've done a lot to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we went to another level where we set the next ambition to be net zero by 2040. But then what we do is we focus on every aspect of our operations, making, packing, and shipping, to make sure that we can eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, reduce energy, reduce water, eliminate waste, and we measure that every single day, and then we report it. We report it internally, and now we're reporting it externally. As Christina mentioned, investors are expecting more and more of that. We then go to that next level, which is where can we innovate? So innovate so consumers can be able to achieve that, because that's what our company's about. We're making products for people to use every day and doing it in such a way that allows them to be able to be environmentally sustainable, like the example that I've talked about today with Tide turning to cold. And I think it's really important that everyone is held accountable within your own company, and then we are now then externally accountable, which is, as Christina said, happening more and more. Investors are expecting it, consumers are expecting it. But really, it's action. Action is what's most important. There's been a lot of talk over the course of the last few years. I think we're now getting past the ambition stage and now need to go into the action stage and then be able to demonstrate year in, year out progress that's being made and how we're able to really get to this point where we can ultimately achieve this situation or this outcome, which is where we have net zero emissions, so we reduce the temperature and we help the climate and improve the environment.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And we're short on time, but Alan, I'd love to hear your quick answer to this question as well.
I get the hint. As I mentioned earlier, we're the first out-of-home media company to join RE100 with the aim of achieving carbon neutrality across all of our activities in France by the end of this year. And importantly, this commitment covers the scopes of all 1, 2, and 3 in terms of emissions, which is crucial. Following on from Mark, innovation is key. We're working on a series of initiatives to target those emissions, including installation of LED as opposed to neon tubes, and the energy efficiency of our street furniture and digital screens. We're also making a commitment to deliver 100% renewable electricity by 2022, and we are rolling out hybrid vehicles and natural gas vehicles in terms of our maintenance fleets as well. But in terms of innovation on our street furniture and transit products for our service partners, we are introducing innovations such as Filtreo, which is a new generation of bus shelter which actually filters the surrounding air. And in terms of measurement, we're using a new system called Empreinte 360, which is the first environmental, economic, and social footprint calculator for advertising campaigns throughout France. And initiatives like this will be rolled out across the entire group, underpinned by our 6 priorities of reducing consumption of energy, environmental impact, social health and safety, and encouraging stakeholders and employees, and importantly suppliers, to pursue sustainability too. I would just add another thing that each country's CEO's remuneration is also linked to meeting those sustainability KPIs. And what I would say is, additionally, as cities become more accustomed to including sustainability in their urban planning, we are investing in product lifecycle analysis of our street furniture to demonstrate that the designs with longer usable lives are more valuable than those that must be replaced in shorter timelines. So if we can extend the life cycle of products for city dwellers, that would reduce our city's carbon footprints and free up more resources to provide more amenities that can redress social and environmental health equity. And then recently we've partnered with Microsoft Research, Urban Innovation Group, and Array of Things to team up with to provide the public with granular data about Chicago's air quality. This network, probably the densest installed in any city in the world, but certainly here in the US. And as we all know, air pollution is a major concern for cities, and its consequences for human health and the environment are real, and it's crucial for urban areas to assess that air quality on a real-time basis and formulate the policies to address these changes that are required. And we're very proud to be at the cutting edge of this type of technology that can make these real benefits happen.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Well, I wish, honestly, I had much more time with each of you to continue to talk about this. This has been such an engaging conversation. And as we close, I want to ask each of you an important question, because while solving the climate crisis is increasingly urgent, it's my opinion that the right solutions for solving this crisis will be ones that center historically and frankly intentionally marginalized groups who are being affected first and worst by the crisis. People like our Indigenous siblings, who are not only weathering the most devastating impacts of the crisis, but who for many years have also been on the front lines of the fight for a better climate future. So I'd love to hear from each of you. How are you approaching sustainability in a way that takes this into account and ensures that the climate solutions we pursue are both just and equitable? And I will say before you answer, I would love to have an entire panel on this very question itself. However, we only have a minute for each of you to give your answer. So please try to be as concise as possible, but I am very interested to hear your perspectives on this. And Alan, I'll send it over to you first.
Wonderful. Great to kick this off. So following on what I was saying, I mean, clearly, cities, 3% of the world's surface, 72% of, contribution to global emissions. So that is a key starting point for us. Unfortunately, most public procurements do not include sustainability criteria. In 2019, for example, JCDecaux conducted a survey of over 200 projects, including 162 public tenders across a range of 49 countries. And although 52% of tenders included some environmental or social criteria, actually only 28% of tenders included both. Environmental criteria alone were included in only 24% of public procurement, while 10% of the tenders had social and sustainable initiatives only. Simply put, although governments care about sustainability and have set important targets, cities generally don't apply such criteria to their own streetscape procurements. We need to build our cities from the ground up with sustainable choices. Just as private actors are increasingly regulated to meet green standards, municipalities should impose such requirements in their own public-private street programs. Urban planners are communicating important ideas for sustainable communities. But to tackle the massive environmental and social challenges facing our communities, cities must apply exacting standards to their own activities. If the catalyst for growth of our societies are cities, embed sustainability criteria in tenders, evaluate that said criteria in a measured, quantitative manner, and then reward those who take sustainable value seriously, systemic change can and will occur. This in turn will help address those environmental, social and community needs that you've mentioned, and redress the long-standing issues of disparity that result in healthier and more equitable cities.
Thank you, Alan. Mark, would love to hear from you. How is Procter & Gamble thinking about centering historically marginalized communities in your climate and sustainability work?
The way we approach this area is, with what we call citizenship, or some people call ESG. And we have to remember that ESG is environmental and social and governance, and they all come together. And so we have to do both. We have to focus on environmental sustainability and equality and inclusion, and that's where our focus is. We join forces with others. For example, Global Citizen, which is focusing on not only defending the planet, but defeating poverty, because we know that it goes hand in hand. So we're part of that overall program. We focus, how we do this is we focus first on making sure that we can address acute crises. For example, our Children's Safe Drinking Water program is a program that has supplied more than 18 billion liters of clean, safe drinking water in 90 water-starved countries. So we can ensure that people can at least just get the safe drinking water that they need through a technology that we've developed. We also focus on disaster relief, so we can address the acute crises of both natural and humanitarian disasters. And then what we do is work on equality inside our own operations, across all of our supply chains, everywhere we operate, so we can ensure that the communities in which we live and work have equality and inclusion. So we're addressing those fundamental systemic issues of equality and inclusion, which then will enable the environmental solutions that we create to have a more proportionate effect across every city in which we operate. Last point, this is an area where we need to not only work individually, but collectively. We are part of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which actually goes and focuses on those areas that are hardest hit when it comes to plastic waste, such as Southeast Asia. We have created technologies, for example, called Pure Cycle, that allows you to convert plastic into the plastic back into virgin plastic, so you can enable to reuse plastic, and so you create a sustainable ecosystem. So again, innovation that can be made available to all is a way in which we can start to address all of these issues across every city and every community in which we live and work.
Thank you, Mark. And Christina, we'll give you the final word on this. And you opened up today's session talking about interconnected systems, and of course, these issues are so interconnected. So I'd love to hear how MasterCard addresses the complex intersection here.
Yeah, it's a question that goes right to the heart of who we are at MasterCard. If you think of us, we're a payments company. Our mission is to build a more digital and sustainable economy. We, in 2015, set a target of moving 500 million people into the formal economy, the unbanked and the underbanked. We did that ahead of time, and we didn't stop there. We actually doubled down and committed another 500 million, so 1 billion people into the formal economy. But the interesting thing is, it's the same population that we have spent, a long time working with that are the most marginalized when it comes to climate change. And so when we looked at how could we have an impact for the planet, for environment, for climate, we looked to our financial inclusion model. But it wasn't just learning from that and actually borrowing it, realizing that when we actually look at the solutions, the problems, that you can no longer separate the human piece from the planet or the humanity from environment. And so I think going forward, we really need to look at how interconnected those issues are. And again, instead of the initiatives that we do being bold commitments in different directions, the more we can look at where those are intersected, both within our own companies and, as you've heard others talk about, that collective action. Hopefully we can not only just build an economy that works for everybody, but that also preserves the planet that we all, thrive on, and need for it to continue.
Thank you. Well, I think that's the perfect note for us to end on. I thank all of you for joining us today, for giving us new things to think about when it comes to how businesses can help solve this crisis, and about how we need to think about the interconnectedness between social issues and environmental issues of our time. This has been the Communicating Climate panel for Climate Week NYC. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.